Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning to those of you on the West Coast, and welcome to the Center for Coordinated Assistance to States, also known as CCAS. This is our Strategies to Reduce the Use of Isolation webinar presentation. I want to thank all of you for registering for today's webinar and taking the time out of your busy schedules to focus on this important issue and working to improve the conditions of confinement, and most importantly, working to improve the long-term outcomes for youth entrusted to our care. My name is Mike Dempsey, and I'm the Executive Director for the Council of Juvenile Correctional Administrators, or CJCA. Also on the call today is Sharon Pett, who is the Project Manager for the Reducing Isolation in Youth Facilities Initiative. Today's webinar focuses on strategies for working with your most challenging youth. We also have on the call with us Darlene Conroy and Jonah Shenham, who are helping with the technical aspects of this program from the CJCA office in Braintree, Massachusetts. For those of you who might be new to CJCA, we are a national nonprofit organization formed in 1994 to improve juvenile justice systems, local secure correctional and residential facilities, services, programs, and more importantly, the long-term outcomes for youth and their families. CJCA represents the youth juvenile justice system CEOs in all 50 states, Puerto Rico, and various major metropolitan counties across the country. The Center for Coordinated Assistance to States was developed in 2014 with a grant from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, OJJDP. The purpose of the center is to assess the need for and coordinate the training and technical assistance designed to build capacity within states, territories, tribal units, and communities to maximize the effectiveness of juvenile justice systems to the benefit of the youth they serve. The focus of the center is to provide ongoing coaching and achieve individual and or behavioral changes that positively impact the juvenile justice system. Joining OJJDP as partners on this project is the American Institute of Research in Washington, D.C., and the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at Georgetown University. At this point, I want to turn it over to Jonah, who's going to go over a few of the housekeeping guidelines for the webinar. Jonah.
Thank you, Mike. So before we get started, just a couple of brief housekeeping items. All attendees will be muted for the duration of this webinar. However, you can ask questions at any time by typing them into your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll try to get to all questions at the end of the webinar during the Q&A session. If you're asking a question and it relates to a particular presenter's content, it is helpful to note that in your question text so that we can best direct your question to that presenter. This webinar is being recorded. A link to the audio video recording, as well as a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation used today, will be sent out to all attendees and registrants following the webinar. And with that, I will turn it over to Sharon Pett.
Jonah, I'll go ahead. Thank you. I'll go ahead and do our panelist introductions real quick. Joining on the call today, we have Natalie Walker, who's the Assistant Director for the Indiana Division of Youth Services, Heber Bray, the Interim Chief of Facility Operations for the Oregon Youth Authority, and Bob Torillo, Assistant Commissioner of Operations, Massachusetts Department of Youth Services. I want to thank each of our presenters for taking the time out of their busy schedules to work on their presentations and for taking the time to present to you all today. We very much appreciate their effort and time in doing so. And Sharon, I will now turn it over to you for the objectives.
Great, thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. Again, as Mike mentioned, I'm Sharon Pett, and I've been the project manager for the Reducing Isolation Initiative for the past 4 years. And I really have had the pleasure with working with over 20 jurisdictions throughout the United States who have devoted, their resources and energy to addressing this issue of isolation in their facilities. So we have had over 600 people register for this webinar. So we know that this is certainly an area in which jurisdictions are seeking guidance. And so I'm really looking forward to having all of our presenters share with you today the effective ways of working with their most challenging youth. So more specifically, What we hope to accomplish today is the first objective is to better understand the strategies for working with youth who have chronic or significant mental health issues, primary or secondary trauma, and/or repeated highly assaultive or aggressive behavior. Secondly, we hope that participants will learn about how 3 other state juvenile justice agencies, that's Indiana, Massachusetts, and Oregon, effectively program for these most challenging youth. And finally, we hope that participants will take this information they learn from today's webinar and apply it to their daily interactions with youth in their facilities. Okay, so in the field of juvenile justice, we certainly have all encountered a wide variety of youth who present with very unique issues and who could easily be classified as challenging. However, I'm sure that we can all agree that these 3 groups listed here on the screen tend to be in the higher echelon in terms of who requires additional staff time, attention, and support. And so as such, the focus of today's webinars will be on sharing strategies for dealing with those youth in our facilities who are challenged with one or more of these issues. So we do have a lot of information and material to cover today, so I'm not going to spend too long on this, but I do feel it's important to review some of the research in the field specific to the 3 populations that we will be hearing about today. So our first subpopulation are youth who suffer significant and/or chronic mental health issues. And I'm certain in our professional experience, it's no secret that there's been a drastic increase in the number of youth exhibiting serious mental health issues showing up in our juvenile justice facilities. So in terms of research, the professional body of literature has verified this to be very true. In a meta-analysis published by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, they found that anywhere from 63 to 92% of youth met the formal criteria for a mental health or substance use disorder. In my opinion, this percentage is very astounding, actually. They also found that the issue of mental health disorders is exacerbated by the fact that most young people don't just suffer from one disorder, but rather from 2 or more serious mental health disorders. So this obviously makes our work with these young people even more complex, kind of a puzzle or an enigma that we need to figure out in order to best serve these youth, because ultimately it is our job and our ultimate goal is to help youth become positive members of society. So here's just a list of some of the most common mental health diagnoses that we're all probably seeing in our juvenile justice facilities. These likely come as no surprise. We see ADHD, PTSD, conduct disorder, major depression, and so on. And so as a reminder, youth are not only battling one of these disorders, but oftentimes they are battling 2 or more at the same time. So it makes things a little bit more complex. So the second subpopulation that we're going to be talking about today are youth who have experienced simple or complex traumas in their lives. The research is clear that trauma is a pervasive issue in our juvenile justice facilities. So in this particular study here mentioned on the slide, researchers found that 93% of youth in custody had at least one traumatic incident, and over half of the youth population had experienced trauma 6 or more times. And so this level of trauma is unfathomable. And so with this knowledge, it hopefully is easier for us to understand some of the negative behaviors that we witness in our facilities on a day-to-day basis. So in many ways, it's a formula. You know, over-traumatized youth coupled with a lack of coping skills will basically result in negative acting out behaviors. So throughout today's webinar, our presenters are going to help us better understand how trauma impacts the youth that we serve in our daily interactions. So what the research also tells us is that in addition to trauma impacting a youth's ability to regulate their emotions, it also puts them at greater risk for developing depression, PTSD, and suicidal ideation. And these youth are also at increased risk for engaging in delinquent behavior, running away, struggling academically, and abusing alcohol and drugs. So the third population that we're going to be discussing today are those youth who present as highly aggressive and or exhibit highly assaultive behaviors. So this excerpt was selected from the Desktop Guide to Quality Practice for Working with Youth in Confinement, which was published by OJDDP and some of their partners. So really what this says is this selection here calls on us as professionals to recognize the skill deficits in these youth and cater our treatment to addressing these deficiencies, rather than adhering to our traditional approach of pure punishment. And so we're going to be hearing from our presenters today, again, about the effective strategies for dealing with these youth who have serious and significant deficits, especially in terms of the skills. And so, let me go back, sorry. Okay, so the question here, when we're working with this particular subgroup, those youth who are highly aggressive or assaultive, the question really is to ask ourselves not what do we do with a youth who is seriously aggressive, but rather what have we done or not done before now that has allowed the youth's behavior to escalate to this point. So again, it's our responsibility as professionals to employ effective strategies to dealing with these youth, and hopefully today's webinar will really kind of help us continue moving in that direction and provide us with some new tools in effectively dealing with youth. So I wanted to share this excerpt with you because I think it's a good reminder that by the very nature of these youth, there's a lot of work to be done with all three of these subpopulations, because ultimately these are the most challenging youth. So this excerpt really does remind us that behavior management is not a one-time response, but rather in order to really affect positive behavior change, we must build a culture that views these youth through a therapeutic lens. And again, you're going to be hearing that as a common theme throughout today's webinar. And we need to, it's our responsibility to assist them in identifying their triggers and provide them the tools to help them regulate their emotions. And of course, obviously helping them to identify and transform their thinking errors. And so the fundamental question for today's webinar is how can we best serve these special youth populations and avoid using isolation while also ensuring that staff continue to feel supported. And so I'm going to hand the floor over now to our first panelist, Natalie Walker from the Indiana Division of Youth Services. Natalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sharon. In Indiana, we have implemented a series of initiatives to work with chronically mentally ill, trauma-affected youth and highly aggressive youth, such as staff training, multidisciplinary meetings, individualized plans, housing units, and incentive programs. I will discuss each of these initiatives more in detail. The first of our focus was staff training. All staff complete a pre-service academy, which covers the correctional basics, such as agency policies and expectations. After completing the pre-service academy, juvenile staff have an additional 1 week of training to focus on juvenile-specific topics. It's called Making a Change Academy. Listed on this slide are a few of the training topics covered during the MAC Academy. The training is instructor-led with classroom discussions and activities. All the instructors are facility staff, both custody and non-custody, present during the MAC Academy. During the MAC Academy, we discuss adolescent development and break them into stages of physical, cognitive, emotional, and social changes. Prior to the MAC Academy, staff are provided with information about mental health issues, various disorders, descriptions of typical behavior, etc. MAC Academy then builds on that information and focuses on the juvenile aspect. One session of the MAC Academy is effective interactions with youth. The discussion focuses on communication tips with juveniles with mental health needs. I mentioned that staff receive knowledge of mental health needs during pre-service academy. In this module, we discuss how the staff can apply that information they learned into their work setting. It is great to have background knowledge, but people need to know how to communicate and interact with youth. The staff are provided with techniques that assist in the communication with all students, especially students with mental health needs. In this training module, the focus is empathetic listening and de-escalation techniques. Staff are coached on the do's and don'ts, such as being aware of their tone of voice, making one request at a time, acknowledging the other person's feelings, and making sure they do not sound patronizing or sarcastic. Supervising high-risk youth is another training topic provided during MAC Academy. The focus of this session is on interactions while supervising high-risk students, which opens to the discussion of an attitude of control versus a controlling attitude. The latter, a controlling attitude, is focused on punishment and making the others feel bullied. We all know that does not work well with our youth population. The attitude of control is about the youth feeling the staff are in control of the environment through consistency and fairness of rule enforcement. There is discipline and accountability with an attitude of control, but discipline is different than punishment. With discipline, there's communication regarding the incident or behavior. With an attitude of control, the goal is to help the youth understand why the behavior is unacceptable, impose a logical consequence, and teach the youth new acceptable behavior. During trauma-informed care, participants learn about types of trauma, impact of trauma, which are emotional, psychological, physiological, and social. Staff learn to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma and ways to respond without re-traumatizing. The instructor for this model is a mental health staff member. Staff are advised that they are not to treat the trauma. However, they treat the individual who has special needs due to trauma history in a sensitive, caring, and welcoming manner. Based on training evaluation, staff cites the trauma-informed care training module as one of the most impactful sessions of the MAC Academy. They say they are now more aware of youth nonverbal behavior and how they communicate with youth in crisis situations. The module regarding your responsibility in making a change discusses the youth's expectations of staff and also the expectations of the department has of staff, which are similar to the youth's expectations. The expectations for staff are to be in control, professional, and caring. We talk about being aware of the students, their behaviors in a positive or negative direction, and addressing youth behavior. The different ways of youth accountability are shared with staff, such as the code of conduct and the token economy. Another topic in this module is staff's responsibility regarding mentoring and coaching, assisting youth to make better decisions and guide them towards successful reentry back into the community. The Crisis Awareness Response Team is what we've talked about in previous webinars, is described to the employees. The care team is just another way to display professionalism and role model conflict resolution skills to the youth. The MAC Academy ends with scenario-based coaching. The new staff are given common occurring situations that will happen in the facility and then role play them. The situations vary from non-compliant behavior, maybe self-mutilation, discipline, or de-escalation situation. An example of a scenario is a youth that is not compliant with a request to line up for school movement. That happens frequently in our facilities. The two staff in this MAC Academy will role play. One person plays the role of the staff, while the other person plays the role of the student in the scenario. The individual playing the role of the staff acts out how they would approach the student in a real-life situation. After the role play, they receive feedback from the other staff in the class and the instructor. During the role play debrief, staff are challenged to think about skills they've learned over their weeks of training, such as motivational interviewing, calming the storm, trauma-informed care, and how they can apply them to this scenario. Part of the constructive criticism is reminding staff about the information skills they've learned in the MAC Academy and how to apply those into the scenarios that we discussed when they arrive at the facility. As we all know, over time there is drift from training they've received. All of our staff complete an annual in-service in order to combat drift and remind staff of the information they learned at the beginning of their careers. During the annual in-service, they are provided with a refresher training regarding the topics presented in the MAC Academy, such as mental health, de-escalation techniques, etc. Another initiative we implemented was multidisciplinary meetings. In Indiana, we have fostered a team effort concept that involves constant communication between custody, treatment, education, mental health staff, all departments really. We talk about the use of care teams, reviewed during daily incident monitoring meetings, as we have discussed previously in webinars. However, many times these interactions and daily meetings can be more reactive than proactive. So we implemented multidisciplinary meetings. With the increased number of youth who have challenge, we implemented weekly disciplinary meetings to discuss those youth. Staff from all departments get together, review the week, and process as a group what has been going on with certain students or a group of students or the facility as a whole. Families also participate via phone or in person. These meetings also help all departments monitor solutions that can be used daily for youth who are struggling to assess if these solutions should continue, do they need to be readjusted, or do they need to be discontinued. The meeting also allows for mental health staff to review all the students on medication to see if there have been any positive or negative changes on the youth as observed by education, treatment, custody. At the same time, these departments can review difficult cases with mental health to get their input on individualized ways to address these students' behaviors, their issues, and what can be positive alternatives. In this way, mental health staff can triage which youth should continue to be addressed by other department solutions or the youth that really need to be referred to mental health services. Often these difficult cases are students already being seen individually by mental health or in groups. So it's often a matter of mental health staff teaching the other department staff the same skills they are learning in the classes. For example, a mental health provider may relate that the student has learned and is supposed to be trying to use a DBT skill like moment to pause. The whole team can then brainstorm on ways to best help a student use this skill in class, maybe on the unit or even during line movement. We can't expect the students to use these coping techniques if line staff are not aware of them or how to assist the youth in using them. For each student, a student information sheet is initially created by the treatment staff after we receive a student to give some advice to the custody staff about behaviors a student may exhibit, situations or suggestions for when that works, some ideas on how to handle the situation or handle the youth better. The sheet also includes information on the youth committing an offense, treatment level, any progress, required groups, current medications, individual education needs, and their projected program completion date. After the weekly meeting, the student information sheets are updated to include any updates discussed during that meeting. Any new concerns, any new solutions, anything that was discussed during that multidisciplinary meeting. In this way, without getting detailed on root causes of behavior, custody staff have some sense of ways they could work with each individual, as well as notes on what does not work with that student. We've also encouraged the facilities to use this meeting to refer students to review students in mental health programs, such as DBT or MRT. So if a kid is escalating in behaviors in school or on the unit, then mental health is there to discuss the options, what they've done, like Sharon was alluding to, and what we can do better. In this way, treatment staff can work with mental health staff to tie the students' learning in group to their case plans and to help them practice in the facility and to help them develop reentry plans for returning into their communities. Finally, this meeting allows for staff to reflect, identify patterns of concern, and plan on how to address possible issues before they rise to the level of incidents. This is the most proactive part of the meeting. Staff from all departments can review facility trends, such as negative behaviors, increasing during free recreation. They can problem solve as a group before an incident occurs. Also, with custody staff, we can review if the student who struggles to seem to do better or worse during certain shifts. We can also support positive solutions in each area. Also, this helps us recognize line staff members who excel at working with these youth and help them teach their own techniques to other staff. This way, it is custody making suggestions rather than administration holding down suggestions to custody. The student information sheets are really one type of behavior plan that we utilize on the housing units. With all the behavior plans we utilize, we can get input from the youth and from staff from all the departments. We will also contact the families to get their input on how we can help their child. Family members are also involved in sessions with treatment staff to work out issues the youth had in their home prior to coming to our facility and ways they can utilize their skills when they return home. Behavior plans may include detailed information on the youth's general student history. However, they also always include individualized information on the student's specific behavior issues with suggestions for interactions and recommended interventions. This way, everyone is aware of the student's needs and has worked together with them on their individualized solution. Specific behavior issues should be broken down into specific and measurable focuses behaviors, such as certain percentages of the points or not receiving more than a certain number of disciplinary rewards, but also they should be solution-focused and what specific skills the youth should be utilizing to improve behavior. These plans should also outline behavioral reinforcements for decreasing problematic behaviors and using positive skills and solutions. Staff should provide a variety of reinforcements or ones that build on another, such as moving from verbal praise to token economy incentives. These plans should include behavioral consequences so that the student and staff have structured, measurable consequences for lack of student progress. Finally, these plans should indicate skills or systems the student may utilize to achieve their behavior plan goals, such as journaling, using a stress ball, taking a moment to pause, etc. These plans can be designed as a contract too, signed by the youth, staff working with them, and the staff tasked with reviewing the youth's progress. This emphasizes a team effort that the youth can see concretely. Also, the behavior contract model helps everyone collaborate on creating plans, sharing information, and review and update based upon progress. This helps maintain ongoing conversations between all departments and the student. We utilize 3 types of plans. We talked about the housing unit one already, but we also have one for education and then one for separation. We use a more specific education plan. Often these are based upon the IEPs or feedback from mental health after multidisciplinary meetings to help the teacher work with the student to help keep them in class. These plans also indicate when it is appropriate to send the youth to the principal, whose job is to de-escalate the student and bring them back to class. Sometimes care team is called too. In any of these cases, the plan always is to help the student de-escalate, work out strategies to cope, and get them back to class. They can plan to go back to class and try their new skills with communication to the teachers about what their new plan is. Finally, all students placed in temporary separation are expected, once they have de-escalated, to meet with custody, treatment, and/or mental health. The plan is to design a behavior plan to help them cope with the aggressive behaviors that led to the separation. They cannot leave separation until the plans are made and the student agrees to try them. All these plans are then communicated to all staff and must be attached to the student information sheets. I know this is confusing, but we have the MAC Academy, which is staff training, and then the MAC program. The MAC program is structured and safe therapeutic environment that assists youth in developing appropriate skills while continuing to participate in education and treatment programs within a controlled setting. We are able to have additional staff in that program. Youth are participating in programs, just like the youth in general population. They attend education, recreation, leisure, just in a more controlled and structured environment. Youth are placed in the MAC program as a classification decision made from a referral from the treatment staff. The ultimate goal is to return the youth back to general population housing and programming as quickly as possible for completion of treatment programs. While in the MAC program, youth can participate in the following programs. They can complete aggressive replacive therapy, provides the youth with skills to learn self-control when they are becoming angry. The youth identifies their triggers, cues, anger reducers, reminders, and self-evaluation. The goal is the youth identifies prosocial behaviors to replace past aggressive reactions. Dialectic behavior therapy is designed to help the student deal with frustration tolerance, stress relief, and impulsivity. This therapy is additionally for students who frequently need support deal with their mental health issues. Moral recognition therapy is a proven evidence-based and systematic treatment strategy that seeks to decrease recidivism among students by increasing moral reasoning. MRT targets youth who are in high risk to reoffend and high risk in criminal thinking. While in the MAC program, the youth issues are addressed through cognitive behavior groups and individual behavior plans, which I previously discussed. Then we have our specialized or intensive programs. SHADES is one of the programs was developed to meet the therapeutic needs of identified youth. SHADES is a specialized treatment program for youth with mental health and emotional disorders. It is not a mental health unit. The goal of the program is to maintain students in the least restrictive environment while involving them in treatment programming using non-punitive incentive-based approaches for managing youth behavior to make a productive transition into the community. The staff working in the SHADES unit have a manual that outlines topics regarding staff responsibilities, treatment programming, and interventions for staff to utilize with the youth. Interventions include informal awareness, such as a discussion of the behavior, token economy, behavior awards, and timelines that are individualized. There's a 411, better known as an information binder for staff, which provides snapshots of the youth, the issues, behaviors to be aware of, interventions to utilize, and behavior plans if applicable. The staff assigned seat in this unit and reflection and art stations and activity boxes to increase that involvement of the youth idle time. Honor and incentive programs. So each facility has a program that recognizes and rewards youth that go beyond general performance expectations. Youth are assessed on their behavior, such as hygiene, compliance with staff directions and rules, not receiving conduct reports, etc. Treatment involved in education performance, displaying that good faith effort in all those areas. Typically, the program involves a different colored shirt so the staff and other youth can recognize the students that are on the honor status, and the youth receiving extra privileges or incentives. Sometimes it's more commissary, or they can purchase more commissary. Maybe it's a possible off-ground trip. Some of the one facility has makeup that the female facility, so that they can use that if they're on the honor status. There's also the Y-Tri unit, which was a converted segregation unit. Students earn their way to the unit by meeting behavior and performance expectations. The unit is less structured by the facility or staff. Instead, the students take responsibility for basic operations and the needs of the unit. The students have alarm clocks, so they are responsible for waking themselves up in the morning, no longer making it staff's duty to do that. There's an established weekly cleaning schedule. Students develop the unit expectations and their schedule. For example, how long can they play the video game system? How often they have to participate in certain activities. They develop the schedule of what it looks like. This unit helps prepare the youth in the transition to adulthood. So up next is Herbert to discuss Oregon's initiatives regarding responding to youth behavior.
Thanks, Natalie. This is Heber Bray from the Oregon Youth Authority, and as I get started here, I just want to say off the bat that this is really hard work, and working with these most challenging kids is really hard, and Oregon doesn't have it all figured out. We are in the process of figuring it out. You know, we like to say we're trying to build the plane as we're flying. And so as what we share today is things that are working, and we're continuing to try to get better. In Oregon, we talk a lot about healthy environments, healthy engagement, and really about healthy brain development. As we know, juveniles, adolescents are in this huge time of development, brain development, body development, and we don't want to miss the opportunity to have them develop in ways that are healthy and pro-social. To do that, we've implemented what we're calling the positive human development culture in our facilities. This may look familiar to you, this pyramid. We try to strive to have all of these things in every interaction we have, every time, every interaction, whether it's staff to staff, staff to youth, manager to staff, the organization as a whole, or with our partners. In every interaction, every time, we want to make sure we're having emotional, psychological, physical safety, trying to build caring and supportive relationships and relying on those relationships to help change, having high expectations of each other and accountability, allowing for meaningful participation and connection to the community that we're trying to build, and having youth have connection to the communities that they belong in. We believe that as we build this culture, we'll shift our thinking from kind of this idea that youth come to us because they've done something wrong, which is true, they did do something wrong, and so they're coming to us, but also we're going to hold them accountable, but we're going to help them develop. As we do that, we regularly talk about what we call the resource lens. In our trainings, we talk a lot about this concept of seeing a youth as a victim. If you see a youth as a victim of their circumstances or their mental health problems, perhaps, you have this tendency to want to do things for them. If you see them as a villain, as a criminal, this is the bad things that they've done, you have a tendency to want to do things to them, hold them accountable, give them consequences. If you can see them as a resource, and see the resources they bring to the table, you can start to do things with them, engaging them in their own change process. To do this kind of requires a belief that people can be held accountable and strengthened at the same time. That means as a consequence comes, skill building comes with that consequence, because our goal is healthy, productive, crime-free citizens. So all of that comes together as we help youth develop. One of our taglines that we say all the time, every day, is in every interaction, every time. That is every person that comes in contact with a kid. We don't think of ourselves as custody staff, treatment staff, cooks, janitors, facilities maintenance staff. Everybody is a treatment staff. Everybody has an opportunity to help a youth develop. And so in every interaction, every time, how are you helping someone develop and building that culture we're looking at? Our environments really matter. In Oregon, we've had an opportunity, a huge blessing and opportunity to build some new buildings in the last couple of years and to update some old ones. And as we've done that, we've seen youth behavior change. When they start to see their value reflected in the places where we allow them to live, they see themselves as valuable, and they work on living up to that expectation. And then as we use the resource lens, we see people, all people, not just youth, but our staff and everyone else, as resources to be developed, not problems to be fixed. So with that in mind, this concept and this idea that we all know, anybody who's worked in a facility, operated a facility, understands that the group of youth that is causing the majority of your problems, whether it's violence, acting out behavior, major disruptions on your unit where you have to have everyone have their heads down or be removed from the unit, it's 10 or 15% of the youth that are causing 90% of these disturbances or violence. And so we really dug in Oregon to those kids and said, what's the common factor in these kids? And we found kind of the tale of two kids. The majority of those kids were kids that had mental health concerns and serious trauma reactions. There's a few kids that were more controlled, maybe gang motivated, where they were in control when they did their violence and it had a directed purpose. But the most part were these trauma affected youth and mental health youth. And what we've discovered is that our traditional responses to trauma affected youth only exacerbated the problem. The thing we talk about a lot is that these kids have their alarm system permanently turned on. And if their alarm system's permanently turned on, and then an adult comes in and tries to do a sanction or remove them from the unit, they don't see that as helping. They just see another adult trying to exert power or authority or influence on them that in a negative way, and that alarm system kicks in, and then they have really negative behaviors often. It's very reactive. It's often very violent. So we decided we're going to build a new unit specifically for our most traumatized, most reactive kids. We called it the University of Life. The staff named it that, actually. And in that unit, we flipped the script completely. In that unit, we don't drive towards compliance. So when a young person is starting to escalate because they're not following a directive, they're not following an expectation or meeting an expectation, as that escalation happens, our goal shifts completely to how do we help this young person regulate, not how do we get compliance with the directive that we just gave. That's really hard mind shift for staff to make, with the idea that as soon as we get regulation again, the youth will naturally come in compliance with that expectation, because youth want to do well. They want to be compliant. They want to have relationships with staff. They just don't know how. And that alarm system that's on in their head all the time is telling them that they can't trust us, that we're going to hurt them or whatever. And so we built this new unit. We kind of call it a brain gym. We think about this in terms of youth that didn't have the opportunity to build the connections in their brains around emotion regulation and problem solving. The limbic systems are actually bigger than they should be when you do MRI scans, and we're building new brains. We talk about that all the time. Brains that can regulate in this opportunity we have of development in adolescence. So we decided we were going to do this, and we got all the training together. We actually had the opportunity to take all the staff that were on this unit. We repurposed the unit and took them off-site. We called it a retreat. The staff corrected us and said that's not really a retreat. It was really a working session, and spent the first half of this working session, right, it was about 2 weeks, really training. We trained about trauma, how it affects the brain, how it affects development. We trained what trauma and being trauma-informed was, and how to create a trauma-informed culture. We talked about regular brain development and what normally happens in adolescence. We reviewed a curriculum. I'll talk about that curriculum on the next slide. We talked a lot about how to create a developmentally responsive milieu. Now, that's a fancy way to say, how do we meet kids where they're at? If you have a 14-year-old and you have a 17-year-old in the same unit, and they're at different phases of puberty and development, how do you have the same expectation of both of them? How do you have the same privileges and consequences for both of them? It just doesn't work. You have to meet them where they are, and that means sometimes things don't look fair to kids. And so how do you do that in a way that is okay and kids can do that? We talked a lot about what we call advanced behavioral directives. In the rest of the world, they're called crisis plans, maybe. You know, what do you do when a kid gets escalated, and then every time we modify or adapt or adjust that plan to help prevent the next crisis? What were the antecedents? What helps this kid cope, you know, avoid or manage through that crisis? And then again, we train a whole lot on our positive human development culture. After we got the staff really kind of engaged in this model, and they knew what we were talking about, and they started to believe this stuff, then we turned it over to staff and facilitated the staff, the line staff on that unit, to build their program. And we said, you can build your program as long as it aligns with all of these things that we just trained you. So we had them develop a why statement. We had them develop their own new grading system, which was a very fun experience. In the end, they decided to not have a grading system. They decided to grade like you would at home, where the youth have all the privileges, unless they do something to lose a privilege, and then maybe they get grounded from the TV, or grounded from this thing or that, or grounded from everything for a short time. Very similar to what a home environment would look like, which is, again, really hard to do, but there is no grading system, which means the rewards and sanctions also gets very complicated to do, because, again, these kids reward their alarm systems on, so it's not fair. I think it's not unfair and things, which means we have to rely on those relationships a whole lot. They built the rules. They made some signage for the unit. They talked about what they wanted their outcomes to look like. They named the program, and then we figured out how we could support them over the next year. As we did this, well, let me talk about the curriculum real quick. We also went looking for and searched nationwide and all over for a curriculum that would address trauma, complex trauma in a meaningful way, and could be transferable from group to individual setting to the milieu management model. So everything was using the same language, and we didn't really find anything that was exactly right for us. So we ended up building our own, using a lot of great parts from other places, a lot of DBT, mindfulness stuff, a lot of just good old-fashioned cognitive behavioral stuff is in here, and the whole system works around these 4 big words. And these are things that after talking with lots of kids and lots of years, we think every kid could use, and maybe every person could use, right? I remember, and I'll talk about Believe for a second. I was talking to a youth who was in isolation after some pretty violent behavior, and I was trying to figure out what his drivers was, what's his motivation, what's he want to do, and the youth had no concept about what life would be like if he was out of the correctional facility. And we really tried to look about what's the vision, what are you hoping could happen in your life, what's your dream? And after pushing and pushing, the best this young person could come up with was that he was going to be the kid on the corner selling the dope. And we pushed a little bit farther, and he couldn't even get to an idea where he could be the person one step above the person on the corner selling the dope. He's just going to be the bottom of the pile, and that's where he was going to be forever. And we really got thinking about, wow, kids need to learn to have some hope. They need to have a vision. They need to have dreams about where they can go and believe that they can accomplish more than what they're doing. So we have a whole module on that. We have a whole module on balance, and balance encompasses everything from emotion regulation, how do I stay balanced in my emotions, to how do I stay balanced in my eating and my sleep and work and play and school and recreation. Everything needs to be balanced in your life. In Contribute, we want to talk about engaging and belonging and supporting. How do I contribute to my own success? That's doing things with. And then how do I contribute to my little group's success, and then to my unit success or my family's success, that I need to be contributing. I'm a contributor. And then the last one is Excel, which is really about, I got to try new things. I have to attempt and learn and grow. And as I do that, yeah, sometimes I might fail. And as I do that, I need to learn how to respond to failure and pick myself up and try again. And so we run these four words as kind of a milieu management model, which it's a different approach. So I'll give you an example. So we pretend we're in a Contribute month or a couple weeks of Contribute, and a young person gets caught trying to cheat their medication. Traditionally, staff might ask why they're doing that, or were they cheeking them to get high, or were they cheeking them because they don't want them anymore? Were they cheeking them to give to a peer? What's going on? And as they ask those why questions, trauma kids, their alarm system's on, they get defensive. As they get defensive, they might say things that end up getting them in more trouble. We go through this spiral upward, and we get big bad behavior. In this program, these words become the beginning of our conversation. Hey, I noticed you were cheeking your meds, and we're in a Contribute month. How does cheeking your meds contribute to your success? And let's talk about that. And there's not consequences engaged in that. There's not threatening engaged in that. It's just, hey, we're talking about how do you contribute, or we're talking about how does that help you stay balanced. And it becomes the in to the conversation around emotion regulation. And so this has been really useful for the staff as we've moved into the curriculum. I've clicked the button and it's not going. Let me get back over here. Try one more time. There we go. We learned a lot from this program. As we've been in it about 2 years now, a little more than 2 years, we've had about an 80% reduction in violence, 80% reduction in just total overall incidents and isolation placements from what these kids were doing before we put them in this program. Additionally, we've had youth that have traditionally gotten stuck in the system, be able to move out of the system and totally get off custody and parole, and are living kind of happy lives now out in the community, where these youth in the past would just kind of spin and spin and spin because that reactivity, even if they were able to release to a lower level of care, they didn't have the relationships there, and they would spin back out and have to come back. So we learned a lot of things as we did the U. The first one I talked about already, we shifted from this compliance model to a regulation model. How do we get regulation first? we say regulation in every interaction every time, right? We believe, and the brain science will say that what fires together wires together, and as we're trying to rebuild or build brains that can emotionally regulate, to do that you have to get dysregulated. So instead of having a shift where we just try to keep things quiet and calm, we actually have to have kids challenged enough that they get dysregulated at times. They have to start down the path they've always gone down to learn how to step off of that path. And that's really scary for staff, but as they've been doing it, they've gotten the hang of it and started to understand that it actually helps youth make change. This next one is hard. We never give up on a youth. These youth, particularly the trauma mental health kids, have been bounced around in the system for years. Often these mental health kids were, human service kids, so they were removed from their homes early. They maybe did foster home after foster home after foster home, and then these reactive behaviors ended up getting them kicked out. Maybe they did some residential placements and they get kicked out. They go to detention. They have these behaviors. They just keep escalating due to behavior, and people just keep moving them on. So we decided that no matter what the behavior, we were just going to keep them. We were never going to move them on to a new place. They were ours, and as soon as kids, they all test that, and when they realize that we're going to stick with them is when change starts to happen, and it happens rapidly. We actively engage youth by doing things with them. So it's everything. We eat, we play, we do treatment, it's engagement all the time. And then again, we give every opportunity we can to have kids make decisions for themselves. They need to learn to make those decisions. So that's the U. It's, like I said, been up for about 2 years and doing awesome. We're taking those concepts and now going statewide with them. I want to shift gears a little bit to something we started only a few months ago, which is a different approach to reducing isolation for us, which is a concept we call in-between spaces. This concept is really about, we have a kid who's escalated. In the past, maybe this youth would have gone to isolation or would have remained in the living unit and just been hard to handle and caused a disruption to all the other youth's treatment and regular activities. And so now we have this spot that's in between. It's not isolation, it's not segregation, it's not confinement, because it is staffed with highly skilled, what we call skill development coordinators. And so we were going to build these in-between spaces about 2 years ago. And we went out and we started talking to our staff, and they said, stop. Don't do it. Before you do anything, we have to work on the culture. Because if you make this cool place that we could use to help teach kids things, and the culture's not there and people don't understand, the staff that are into this kind of more punitive model will quickly turn that place into a punitive thing. Instead of saying, hey, why don't you calm down, let's take a breath, why don't you go take some space in the in-between space and get your head on straight, work on some problem solving, and then come back. It'll turn into, hey, you have to go, you're in trouble, get down there, and more of a directive type thing. And it will become something to power struggle over, and it will become negative. And so we stopped. We listened to our staff, and we worked on the culture. We talked to staff for a long time about why reducing isolation is good, why giving kids options is good, why teaching emotion regulation is the goal, and all of those things. And we, like I said, we just implemented this a couple of months ago, and so far it is going great. We call the area steps, or the program steps, and I'll talk about that in 1 second. In this idea, we took this concept we had at the U, where we have these 4 big words that lead us into conversations, and really language matters. So we say, how do we address a general population kid that's starting to be escalated or starting to have negative behavior in a way that allows them to save face and doesn't escalate the situation? I think many of you have been upset, and somebody says, you just need to calm down. That's never helped me calm down in my whole life. In fact, it's made me more agitated usually. And so we are are going away from that and just starting to ask kids what they need. So in this is our attempt at that, is we're just asking kids, hey, what's your next step? I can see you're getting escalated. I can see things are bad for you right now. What's your next step? And because we're pre-teaching this acronym of STEPS, we're hoping that, you know, and it has been kind of triggering kids to stop and think through that. But if we, you know, allow them to save face and use some language that's non-threatening, we're getting some better traction. So STEPS, super easy cognitive behavioral stuff, right? Stop, recognize what's going on, think about your options, explore, you know, see what's out there, you know, see what will work, put your plan into place, and share with the necessary people. You know, what's your next step? Even if a kid can at that point just stop and recognize what's going on, we've got a big win. And so we've had this going now for a couple months. We've had about I don't know the number off the top of my head, but we've had a great reduction in isolation placements just in the last 2 months using this program. The last thing we have here is this idea, every time we've introduced something new and cool like this, especially with skill development coordinators to help, the staff on the floor that we're working with that kid, as soon as the youth goes to STEPS or goes and works with a QMHP or goes to mental health or wherever, they immediately disengage and they think, oh, not out of sight, out of mind, not my problem anymore. So we had to set up requirements for those people. No, you're still going to come and you're going to do the peer mediation if this was a peer-to-peer problem. You're still going to come and do a staff mediation if this was a staff-to-peer problem. You're going to do a Plan B conversation if problem solving is the right thing. You're still going to come and talk about what the restrictions are on the unit. You know, if this was an upset about the TV or an upset about you know, a basketball game, what are the restrictions going to be? And you're still going to talk about that change commitment. The skill developers are going to do some things, but really everybody's responsible for everything. We just wanted to really lay out for staff. You can't just have this kid out of sight, out of mind. Still your responsibility, still your opportunity to make relationships and help kids through things. So with that, I think that I am turning it over to Massachusetts.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Bob Turillo. Good morning, and I guess good afternoon to those that are listening. I want to talk a little bit about some of the interventions that we've used in Massachusetts. Our guiding principle in Massachusetts is that removing a youth from any programming should take place only when the concern of imminent danger to the youth or to others takes place. Now, we know that youth who fit this criteria are usually not only the most challenging, but they're typically the most difficult youth that staff have in engaging. And also, they are also youth that staff, sometimes in staff-youth interactions, are the most difficult for staff to remain objective because of past conflicts. So one of the things that Massachusetts has done is that we've changed our behavior management system to be based on positive youth development and to be incentive-based. Now, what I mean by that is that we've moved away from a point system. We've based our incentive system on positive youth development concepts so that they're strength-based and not based on either consequences or punishment. And also, it's based on de-escalation and discussion. So one of the training techniques we use is we do use motivational interviewing techniques. And what we find with motivational interviewing is that it reduces youth staff conflict and it gives youth choices for making better decisions. And it's not an interaction where staff says, if you don't do this, I will do that. Also, our treatment is based on DBT. I know some of the presenters before me have discussed DBT. We've been doing DBT at all of our locations for the past 14 years. One of the great things about DBT, especially with trauma responsive youth, is that it teaches mindfulness and self-regulation techniques. And it also teaches youth skills to help them self-de-escalate themselves and self-regulate. It has shown great efficacy with youth who have long trauma histories. We also, in addition to our clinical staff who are trained in DBT principles, we do have our group worker staff trained and co-lead DBT groups so that they can, in their interactions with youth, utilize DBT concepts and skills in their on-floor interactions. We also find that it's a secondary gain for staff because it allows them to use some of those same skills, because we know that youth-adult interactions can be quite tension-based, and at times it can be difficult for staff to remain objective. We also use DBT skills across our whole continuum so that when youth travel from one setting to another, they're coming into a program where they're familiar with the language, they're familiar with the concepts, and it makes for a much smoother transition. One of the things that we recognized when we revamped our room confinement or isolation practices in 2007 was the challenge of either preventing or assisting youth in minimizing the recurrence of another isolation or room confinement. So we developed what we call an individual support plan. Now, an individual support plan is a policy and a practice. So it was developed for assisting youth with significant problematic behaviors that interfered with program completion and youth staff and safety. And I think it's been mentioned by some of the presenters before me that all youth should be provided the tools and support for success. And this is in keeping with the department's vision for all youth that they become valued, productive members of their community and lead a fulfilling life. So the ISP is a intervention that can be triggered by a group worker, the youth, a family member, any staff can request that an ISP be implemented. And essentially what that means is upon request for an ISP, there's a convening of the staff with the youth and with family members to develop a very specialized, individualized plan. And the plan is specifically to address the safety, cognitive, emotional, medical, and or mental health needs of the youth. It's an all-hands-on-deck approach. It's time-limited with specific short-term interventions that lead to a positive outcome. It's not a contract. We learned over time that the typical response for these youth to put them on a contract was essentially setting themselves up for failure because we were asking them to fulfill and accomplish certain tasks that they were not able to accomplish. So we flip that around, and as was mentioned earlier, it's important for the youth to know, even though their behavior might be quite distasteful and harmful, that the adults and the community are there to support them. Now, some of the activities that we might do in the ISP is greater family contact, having the youth write some of their own specific goals. We might have more youth-adult interactions, check-ins, allowing for opportunities of youth to receive real-time feedback and positive support. And also the goal of the ISP is to minimize any situation where the youth is outside of normal programming. So the ISP is truly designed for the purposes of helping the youth get back on track with adult support and to be in a position of where they can see some positive outcomes. We've also introduced, as a part of our room confinement policy and our incentive-based program, is what we call a repair system. I think we're all familiar with the fact in a residential setting that it's extremely important for youth to demonstrate when they break residential norms to the community that they're taking some responsibility. So programs have designed repair systems that have a various menu of things that youth can do, and they can choose from that menu that they can demonstrate to the community that they're taking responsibility. And one of these things that we recognize from this, that allows the youth to have some opportunity to have control, and it also minimizes putting staff and youth in a position of creating conflict over what activity is going to take place. The other thing we've learned over time is generally staff sometimes put themselves in positions of where these activities become house cleaning. And we find that in the long run, those types of situations create greater conflict for the youth. The other positive aspect about the repair is to the youth, other youth in the program, it's an observable action showing peers that they are taking responsibility and they're willing to give something back as a result of their action. Although we know that a repair is a time-focused event, one of the other things that's attached to this is that there may be adjustments made to their individualized treatment plan for assisting the youth in recognizing that community norms are beneficial not only to themselves but also for the other youth. So we are also using repairs as an opportunity to assist youth in looking at the longer term gains and the reasons why it's important to have these community norms. The other thing that takes place in a repair is a very intensive debriefing. So staff and youth are able to process some of the areas that may have not worked well. And we know in all programs that sometimes youth legitimately can present situations where they could advise adults of different ways of responding or different ways of interaction that may have de-escalated the situation. One of the other things the department did as a result of our revisions to our room confinement policy is we developed a statewide safety committee. The safety committee was formally chartered to improve safety in DYS programs. I think everyone listening is aware that youth and staff safety is a primary focus of all of our work. It was chaired by our 2 deputy commissioners. There was representations from our state and provider groups. It included field-based staff, union representatives, legislators, and key human resource representatives. Out of that initial safety committee task force came an ongoing safety committee that now meets regularly. It's an opportunity for the department to get feedback from those closest to the field so that we can revise and make adjustments as necessary. It's also an opportunity for us to look at data trends, discuss policy, training, and general problem solving. Another element that we added was to dedicate a senior manager specifically for staff support services. Understanding that in some situations these events did lead to staff injuries, the department recognized that it was important to ensure staff that the department was devoting resources to assist them to provide support. Our Director of Victim Services is also our Director of Staff Support Services. What that means is that any events that may take place throughout the department, which include situations that might be difficult for staff, the Director of Staff Support Service will provide direct outreach to that individual and will allow that individual to have a private conversation and allow them to discuss the circumstances. It's also an opportunity for mediation or for, in some instances, for youth to be processed and debriefed in working on an arrangement where an apology may take place. We also allow, in these situations, for staff to participate in a meeting where they might have some input on either a change in placement or time extension. So what we mean by that is although we don't want the youth to feel that that particular event or that particular staff is determining what their next step may be, we do want them to recognize that the individual who has been harmed does have a right to express their opinion and their thoughts about what they feel might be best interest and also to remedy the situation. We also use traditional EAP practices. So I'm going to turn this back, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, everyone. So we do have a few questions. I'm glad we have some time here to get some of these questions answered. So I'll just, let's start with Natalie. Some of these questions are geared toward just gathering more information about the MAC program. So some of the questions asking about whether or not the MAC unit is a specialized unit and how long that program is.
The MAC program is it's a separated unit, so it is away from the general population. But the program, it depends on the youth. It can be a week, it could be a month. It depends on how well that youth is adjusting and going back into general population. The whole goal is for that kid to get back to general population as quickly as possible. And I know there was a question regarding MAC units and also shades. Those two, they are separate units, but they interact with the general population youth, especially shades. They go to school with other kids. MAC unit, as they transition out to general population, the first step is to get that kid back into school to see how they interact with other peers, and try to test those coping skills and those new skills that they've learned so that we can put that kid back out to the general population as safely as possible.
Great. Thank you, Natalie. And I guess I'll stick with you for a moment because there was another question about the RIYF program, and can you provide a little bit more information about that program?
The RIYF program is one of those programs where the youth is selected or applies to go into that program based on, you know, the way they're behaving in school, on the unit, and programming, those kind of things, as a way of us to kind of reintegrate that kid back out to the community as far as we're giving them more responsibility, we're giving them more, more kind of reentry focused programming. And we're trying to like help them utilize those skills and build a community so that they're helping each other, and then they can transition out into the home life.
Okay, great. Thank you, Natalie. There's some other questions here, but I'm going to maybe we'll let Heber give you a break for a second here, and we'll let Heber answer a question. So thanks. Heber, so there was some questions around whether or not you used motivational interviewing in the development of the programs in Oregon?
For the University of Life.
I believe that's what this one is about.
Yeah.
It wasn't specific.
So yeah, the model, the curriculum that we built does have a lot of MI components in it. The concept really with these kids, like I use this phrase a lot, that they have their alarm systems stuck on, right? The fight flight part of their brain is really either on a hair trigger or kind of just always on. So being able to the MI phrase roll with resistance, or resist the righting reflex, right, where you need to make right or correct, and you roll with the resistance that a kid gives you instead of butting up against that and pushing back. Those are absolutely integral to that program, because as soon as you do that, these kids escalate. As soon as you meet that resistance with resistance, you're going to get escalation every time. You can do that in other populations and be okay. You just can't do it with these trauma kids and have it turn out the way you want. So there is this kind of underlayment of MI, and how do you talk to kids where you get asking these questions to build that discrepancy. That's kind of the lead in also with the 4 big words. which is you're just asking questions, and those questions lead to conversations which hopefully builds discrepancy in a kid where they want to make change. Instead of us telling them you have to make this change or you have to use this skill, it's how do we get you there where you want to use this skill because you see the benefit of making the change.
Great. Thank you, Heber. Just one other question. We'll stick with you for a moment here, and then we'll move on to Bob. So just a question about Nexus curriculum. Folks are asking about the Nexus program curriculum and if it's evidence-based and is it accessible to other folks?
So Nexus is, it's homegrown. We built it, and so it's a bunch of pieces from other evidence-based or evidence-informed curriculums. And so, I can't say as a standalone with the way we've organized it and worked it that it is evidence-based yet. Depending on what we're saying evidence-based to do, we can definitely say that if we have about 2 years worth of data using this, that we have reduction in incidents and violence and behavior. Can we say that it's evidence-based to reduce recidivism? We can't say that yet. We just don't have the time under our belts. Of course, Oregon loves to collect data, and so in a few years we'll know those things. And in terms of sharing it, we're not really sharing the model as of yet. We wrote it internally for one unit, and as we did it, we didn't do the best job of doing all of our footnoting and citing, and so we're going back through it and doing that, giving credit where credit is due before we start sharing it with other places. It's definitely, like I said, it's a compilation of lots of good things from lots of good people, and wouldn't really feel real comfortable about just passing that out freely.
Great, thank you, Heber. So how about this one is actually for all the presenters. So Bob, if you don't mind, you can start us off. It was just about what experience in education that you require for your direct care staff.
Well, I think at the current time is that we would like people to have at least a high school degree, but it's unlikely at times. Some of our staff have a bachelor's, but I would say most of our group worker staff is probably young men and young women between the ages of 22, 23 to 28, may have some prior work experience. However, not many of them will have either advanced degrees or college degrees.
Great. How about Natalie?
We do require either like a GED or high school diploma and we prefer we prefer like some experience with juvenile, but we do provide some of that training, and so we can help them make that transition if they don't have that.
Okay, great. Thank you. And what about Heber in Oregon?
So in Oregon, we also require a high school diploma or equivalent. We have a couple levels of care, so we call our frontline staff group life coordinators. That name is up and position description is up for review right now. But we have group life coordinators. The 99% of our group life coordinators are called group life coordinators 2. And to be a group life coordinator 2 requires that high school or equivalent and 6 months of experience with adolescents somewhere. We prefer a 2-year degree, or there's a certificate, a juvenile justice certificate that is available in Oregon. We can hire folks without the experience as a group life coordinator 1, which is a lower pay scale. It's kind of an entry level thing, and then they can kind of graduate into the level 2 when they get some time under their belt and show some proficiency with kids.
Okay, great, thank you. So we have some other questions around basically when youth are held out of school because of their behaviors, how are the educational needs met? And so, Heber, do you want to share?
Yeah, that is always a hard thing to do. We try our very best not to hold kids out of school. And when we have to, usually it is because the kid is currently and in the moment so escalated that they're unsafe and they can't be in class. In those moments, we're just not meeting an educational need. We're meeting a need to help teach a kid to regulate, teach a kid some problem solving, or teach conflict resolution, and then we're going to try to make that up because we do year-round school here in Oregon. If it's a more serious situation, say a youth assaulted maybe a staff and caused an injury, broken nose or something, and we're going to be holding that youth away from the general population for a little bit longer time where they will miss some school, we do have teachers from our school assigned to go to the place where we would be holding them and provide education during the daytime. Sometimes that's a combination of instruction and packet work. Sometimes it's instruction and computer Chromebook work. We have a lot of Chromebooks that we use, but it is always a struggle to get that education in.
Okay. How about the others? Bob and Natalie, anything to add?
Yeah. Well, I say in Massachusetts, this has been a particularly sentinel point for us. So in our ISP policy, we specifically have clearly articulated that the youth shall continue to receive educational services. And what I mean by that is we recognize that there are events that take place that may temporarily remove a youth from school. However, we do not allow in any, if you want to say, programmed or planned removal from school. So if a youth needs to be in another location during the school day, they will be afforded educational staff to complete. But we've taken the position that it's extremely important for those youth, especially for some of our youth, as it is in other states, their educational participation is an entitlement. So we look at it as a temporary situation, and if there's any thought about making anything longer than temporary, then they need to be provided with educational services.
Thank you.
And we're similar to that in Indiana. In our MAC units, we do have a teacher that is assigned to those areas to provide education. At one of our facilities, they have 2 classrooms, so all the kids in the MAC unit go to those 2 classrooms until they transition out to general population. So we do the same thing, and if it's like they've had a fight or assault that morning and they're removed for separation, we still provide them education while they're in temporary separation until they come back out to general population.
Okay. Great, thank you. So we're just going through some of these other questions here. There's a question around, this doesn't specifically state who this question is directed to, so I think any of you can answer this. But it says, how do you determine if something's not working because of a staff member instead of the youth, or techniques that are not being employed properly by the staff? So any takers on that? Eber?
This is Bob. I don't mind answering that because I think that's a very good question. When we work with this particularly challenging populations, we do expect that one of the conversations to take place, are there adult-youth situations where the adult interaction may not be facilitating, it may actually be escalating the youth. We know that those situations do happen. And my answer to that is that's where we rely on departmental senior staff in reviewing these types of cases to ensure that in situations like this, as much as possible, that there aren't adult-youth interactions that are generated by staff that quite frankly might be either triggering or escalating the youth, which does sometimes happen. But it is a very challenging process to go through.
Yeah, and we at Indiana, we do review all the situations that happened the day before. So if you had a fight or assault, the day before, that next day, we're going to review that situation. Either we're going through the video, we're going to go through the incident, and a lot of that's going through what we talked about, our daily incident monitoring meetings. So department heads are all there present. So you have your custody representative, you have education, treatment, everyone's there along with the upper level management. So they are reviewing that situation. So they're looking at what the youth contribution and what we can do for that youth. But then they can talk about, you know, if they were in the area, what they saw or heard before the situation, so that maybe if it's a staffing situation, then we can get that person retrained, refocused, you know, and get them back on mission with our ideas.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just, you know, echo what has been said. This really comes down to that culture on the unit and the local level, the lowest level supervisor having bought into your mission and the vision for where you're going, and then having the skill to then express that to the staff that they interact with every day, and then also having the skill and the courage to have those tough conversations with the staff that may not have bought in yet, or may not have the skill to avoid that power struggle or to, you know, avoid that confrontation, or avoid or go into that with empathy and with a motivational interviewing kind of approach where they want to come at it with this kind of hard line. That front line, the lowest level supervisor over those people, is really the key to making that culture work, at least in our system.
Great, thank you. So I think we have time maybe for one more question, and this one is around mindfulness and actually DBT. And so I'm going to combine a few questions here, and says, you know, for those folks that are doing DBT or creating curriculums based on DBT, are you running the DBT to the full extent of the model, or are you just pulling pieces out and the concepts?
So here in Massachusetts, we've worked with Marsha Linehan to modify so we're pulling a lot of the skill and forms. So we're not going to claim that we're using the formal clinical treatment of DBT, but we're taking a lot of the concepts, and we've, with Marsha Linehan, developed a workbook where it includes all those activities, and she has signed off on that. And the way we process that and work that out is clinical staff are all trained in DBT, and we have 2 on-site DBT groups every week.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Or Natalie?
Yeah, I will say we do 2 things, right? So in the University of Life with our male trauma boys, we are using parts. So we have pulled out some mindfulness and some emotional regulation, the distress tolerance skills and some things, and that's part of our Nexus curriculum. It's definitely not, we couldn't say that we are doing DBT. In our female facility, we are very much like Massachusetts, where we had Marsha Linehan come down. We have what we call OIA adapted DBT. We have a workbook and groups and regular consultation with some DBT experts where we are running DBT, but if I grabbed the borderline DBT book, it wouldn't be that same clinical book. We have our OI adapted version that she signed off on for our female population.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think that we're actually toward the end of our program here. I'm going to hand it back off to Mike so he can close us out. Mike?
All right, thank you. Thank you to all our presenters and to all our participants on today's webinar. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy days to help work on this important issue. One thing is very clear: how staff are trained and how staff respond to youth behavior issues has a profound impact on the culture and the atmosphere of these facilities. Reducing the use of isolation improves the overall environment and leads to reduced incidents of violence and fewer youth and staff injuries. So thank you all again. I believe a recording of this webinar will be posted on the CJCA website, along with the PowerPoint presentation used during today's presentations. I think there may also be a short survey for you to take upon closing out of the application. Please be sure to complete the survey as we use your feedback to improve future webinars. Thank you all very much, and have a great rest of your day.